The moment my daughter raised her glass and called me the failure, the room stopped breathing. Her name is Victoria Sterling, and she has always known how to command attention. She smiled as she spoke, the kind of smile meant for photographs and promotions, not for family. "I just want to thank everyone," she said, her voice light and practiced, "especially for supporting the people in this family who actually turned out successful." Her eyes flicked to me. "And for forgiving those who didn't." The word landed clean and sharp. Failure. I am Catherine Sterling, 71 years old. I've been a wife for almost 5 decades, a mother for over 4, and apparently, according to my daughter, a cautionary tale best delivered between appetizers and wine. No one laughed. No one corrected her. Plates stayed still. Conversations died mid-sentence. I felt every pair of eyes slide toward me, then away again, as if embarrassment were contagious. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Shame had never been my problem. Silence had. Victoria continued talking, filling the space with praise for herself, her career, her future plans. Each sentence leaned on the assumption that everything in her life was solid, guaranteed, already owned, including me. Then, beneath the table, David reached for my hand. My husband's grip wasn't gentle. It was steady, intentional. He leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "She doesn't know yet," he said quietly. I turned my head just enough to see his face. Calm, focused. Not surprised, not angry, certain. I looked back at Victoria, still glowing under the attention, unaware that anything had shifted. She spoke as if the night belonged to her, as if this dinner were a coronation instead of what it was becoming. Something inside me settled. Not courage, not anger, clarity. I realized then that this evening wasn't about enduring another insult or swallowing another slight. It wasn't about correcting her or pleading for respect. This night had already changed direction, and my daughter had no idea. They didn't start calling me a failure that night. Victoria only said it out loud. I had heard the word before, dressed up as concern, disguised as advice. "You had so much potential, Catherine. You played it safe. You could have been more." It always came from people who never asked what I had already given up. I used to teach literature at a small public school on the south side of Savannah. I loved that job. I loved watching students discover that words could change the way they understood themselves. Then Victoria was born, and later came her brother. And then came my husband's heart scare that everyone forgets now. The hours didn't work anymore. The insurance didn't cover enough. Someone had to be practical. That someone was me. "I'll take a break," I told the principal. "Just a few years." Those years turned into decades. No one ever called that a sacrifice. They called it a choice. And choices, apparently, were easier to judge than circumstances. At the table, Victoria leaned toward her cousin and said, not quietly, "I just never understood settling." Her voice carried confidence, not cruelty, which somehow made it worse. I needed more than routine. I looked at her hands as she spoke, manicured, uncalloused, hands that had never packed lunches at dawn or balanced checkbooks at midnight. David caught my eye. He didn't interrupt. He never did. He knew that if I spoke now, it would sound like defense, and defense was something I had done my whole life. Victoria went on about deadlines and leadership and recognition. She spoke as if success were a straight line and failure a personal flaw. Each sentence erased the hours I spent holding our family together while everyone else climbed. When she paused, I felt the weight of her words settle where my career used to be. I had been reliable, present, necessary. Somehow those qualities never made it into her definition of worth. I realized then that the name they gave me had never belonged to me at all. It belonged to the story they needed, so theirs would make sense. And for the first time, I stopped carrying it. Once Victoria realized no one was stopping her, she leaned into it. She set her glass down and smiled at her aunt across the table. "You remember when Mom used to say she'd go back to teaching someday?" She laughed softly, as if sharing a harmless memory. "I guess some people just get comfortable where they are." Her aunt smiled back, tight and quick, then dropped her eyes to her plate. My brother-in-law cleared his throat and said nothing. My cousin suddenly found the salt shaker fascinating. Someone reached for their water and knocked it over, then apologized to Victoria instead of me. No one met my eyes. Victoria noticed. I could see it in the way her shoulders straightened, in how her voice grew more confident. Silence, to her, sounded like permission. I just believe in momentum, she continued. If you stop moving forward, you fall behind. That's just reality. She shrugged, then added, I learned that early. I thought of the nights I stayed awake balancing bills while she slept down the hall. I thought of the mornings I drove her to school before dawn, so she could attend programs I never could have afforded otherwise. David shifted beside me. His jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. He was watching the room, not Victoria. Rebecca Moore, my oldest friend, sat 2 seats away. She looked at me once, long enough for me to know she understood, then looked down. Even her silence hurt. It told me how alone I was willing to be made. Victoria tapped her fork against her plate. I don't mean to be harsh, she said, which was how I knew she meant to be exactly that. But pretending choices don't have consequences doesn't help anyone. A few people nodded, not in agreement, in relief. Relief that the attention wasn't on them. That was when it settled into place. This wasn't a careless remark. This wasn't wine loosening her tongue. The pauses were timed. The glances rehearsed. She knew who would stay quiet. She knew who wouldn't challenge her. She had chosen this moment because she believed it was safe. Safe to reduce me. Safe to rename me. I folded my hands in my lap and felt David's thumb press once against my knuckle. Steady and deliberate. I understood then that the silence around the table wasn't accidental. It was cooperation. Victoria spoke the way people do when they think the ending is already written. She leaned back in her chair and said, It's funny how things work out. Her eyes moved briefly toward me, then away. You plan long enough, and eventually everything falls into place. Especially when you're patient. Exactly, her cousin replied. Victoria smiled. I knew what she meant. She had been patient with me for years. Patient while she waited for signatures, for reassurances, for the quiet transfer of things she already considered hers. The house is such a burden at your age, she'd told me months earlier, standing in my kitchen with a folder tucked under her arm. Maintenance alone is exhausting. You should let me handle it. I remembered touching the edge of that folder, feeling the weight of the papers inside. I'll look at them later, I had said. She hadn't liked that. At the table now, she lifted her glass again, this time toward her uncle. It's nice knowing the future is settled, she said. No surprises, no loose ends. David glanced at me. He didn't need to speak. We both knew which ends she believed were already tied. Victoria continued. I've already started planning ahead. It's responsible. She paused, then added casually, Mom agrees. She knows it's time to simplify. Simplify. That was her word for taking control. I set my napkin down slowly. I don't remember agreeing to that, I said. She turned toward me, surprised, then recovered quickly. You said you trusted me, she replied. That's the same thing. Several people nodded, as if trust were a signature and silence a contract. David's hand tightened briefly on my knee, grounding me. He had seen the emails, the follow-up messages, the reminders phrased as concern. He knew exactly how much Victoria believed she already owned. She believed the house was no longer mine. She believed the accounts were shared in name only. She believed the future had been signed away quietly, politely, without resistance. I looked at her, then really looked at her, and understood the shape of her confidence. It was built on assumptions, not facts. On pressure mistaken for consent. Victoria raised her glass again, satisfied, unaware of how fragile her certainty truly was. And for the first time, I saw the leverage she thought she held. It was all she had. David had warned me about this moment long before Victoria ever raised her glass. Don't sign anything when you feel rushed, he'd said, standing at the kitchen counter, while I flipped through papers I didn't fully understand. And don't let anyone convince you silence counts as consent. I had smiled then, tired more than doubtful. She's my daughter, I told him. She wouldn't hurt me. He hadn't argued. He never did when I spoke from hope instead of evidence. He had only gathered the documents, slid them into a folder, and placed them in the safe. "We'll keep these untouched," he said, "just in case." There had been other moments, too. Victoria forwarding emails and asking me to confirm things I hadn't agreed to. Victoria calling late at night, her voice tight with urgency. "I just need you to trust me, Mom." And every time, I chose peace over confrontation, delay over refusal, quiet over clarity. It was easier to protect her than to correct her. Rebecca Moore had tried to tell me otherwise. We were sitting in her living room months ago when she said, gently but firmly, "Silence teaches people what they can get away with." I had laughed then, uncomfortable. "I'm just keeping the family calm." Rebecca shook her head. "You're teaching her that pressure works." At the table now, I felt the weight of every moment I'd let pass. Every chance I'd had to stop Victoria before confidence turned into entitlement. I saw how my restraint had been rewritten as weakness. Victoria was speaking again, outlining plans that assumed my compliance. "It's all handled," she said. "We're just waiting for timing." David leaned toward me, his voice low. "It doesn't have to go any further," he said. "But if it does, we're ready." I looked at the faces around the table, familiar, expectant, comfortable in their belief that nothing ever changed. I folded my hands together and felt something steady settle in my chest. Not anger, resolve. I had spent years protecting my daughter from consequences, believing love meant absorbing the impact myself. Tonight, that ended. For the first time, I wasn't preparing to endure what came next. I was prepared to stop it. Victoria didn't notice the shift at first. She was still enjoying the sound of her own certainty. "Things move fast in my world," she said, turning her glass slowly. "If you don't stay relevant, you get left behind." She smiled in my direction, polite enough to pass as concern. "That's just how it is." I met her eyes and said nothing. Silence had always made her uncomfortable. She filled it quickly. "Of course, not everyone needs ambition," she added. "Some people are happy being background." A few soft chuckles followed. "Not cruel, careful." Then she crossed the line. "I've already spoken to a contractor about the house," she said, glancing at her phone. "It'll be easier once everything's officially transferred. Fewer decisions for you to worry about." The words settled heavy between us. David shifted in his seat. I felt his knee press lightly against mine. A question without words. I nodded once. "I don't recall agreeing to that," I said, my voice even. Victoria waved her hand. "We talked about it. You said you were tired. You said you trusted me." Her tone hardened just enough to sound final. "You don't need to manage things anymore." She believed that completely. David leaned closer, his mouth near my ear. "Now," he murmured. I raised my hand slightly and caught the waiter's attention as he approached with the dessert menu. "Could you give us a moment?" I said. "We're not ready yet." The waiter nodded and stepped back. Victoria frowned. "Why wait?" she said. "This is supposed to be a celebration." "It still is," I replied. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. "Just not the kind you expected." She studied my face, searching for hesitation. She didn't find it. Her smile faltered. Around us, conversation slowed. Chairs shifted. People sensed something but couldn't name it. David sat back, composed. His hands folded neatly in front of him. Everything he needed was already in motion. Victoria glanced at her phone again, then at me. Her confidence cracked just slightly. For the first time that evening, she didn't speak right away. And in that pause, I knew she felt it too. Whatever she thought she had already won was about to be taken out of her hands. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope before anyone could stop me. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voice, no shaking hands. I placed it at the center of the table and slid it forward until it rested in front of Victoria's glass. "What's that?" she asked, already smiling. "Copies," I said. "For clarity." She laughed once, sharp and dismissive, and opened it with 2 fingers. "Mom, this is unnecessary." I said, surprised to find it was true. We walked a few steps before I heard chairs scrape inside. The sound of people rearranging themselves now that the center had collapsed. Victoria was no longer the axis. She was an inconvenience. In the car, my phone buzzed once. A message from Victoria, already unsent when I glanced at the screen. Then another, then nothing. David started the engine. "They'll talk about this," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "What they won't do," he added, "is put it back the way it was." As we pulled away, I realized the absence of noise behind us was an emptiness. It was consequence, settling into place without needing witnesses. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fill it. The consequences didn't arrive with headlines or raised voices. They arrived in envelopes, timestamps, and quiet confirmations. David handled most of it without involving me. He took calls in the morning and returned them before lunch. "The bank confirmed the freeze," he said once, setting his phone down. "They're reviewing everything she touched." Another day, the attorney filed the report. "They'll follow procedure." Procedure. It sounded bloodless, almost kind. Victoria tried to reach me anyway. The first message came the morning after the dinner. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. The second arrived that afternoon, longer, angrier. "You humiliated me." I still didn't answer. By the third day, the messages shortened. "Mom." Then nothing. Rebecca called once. "She's telling people you overreacted," she said carefully. "That you misunderstood." "I didn't misunderstand," I replied. "I understood very clearly." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to say anything?" "No," I said. "Let it stand." That was the difference I was learning to hold. Punishment demanded reaction. Boundaries did not. I wasn't interested in watching Victoria lose her footing. I was interested in stepping out of her reach. One afternoon, David brought the folder out of the safe and placed it on the table between us. "You don't have to look," he said. "I want to," I replied. I flipped through the pages slowly. Deeds, statements, dates that told a story I had avoided reading for years. Not betrayal, exactly. Assumption, pressure. A daughter who believed access was entitlement and silence was approval. David watched me closely. "How do you feel?" I searched for the word and didn't find triumph. I found something steadier. "Finished," I said. He nodded. That's what boundaries feel like when they hold. Later that week, I passed Victoria's name on my phone without stopping. Not because I was strong, because I was done negotiating my dignity. I understood then that control was expensive. It cost trust, connection, and eventually leverage. Letting it go felt lighter than winning ever had. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It settled in pieces, each one earned by not reaching back. And I let it. The house was quiet when I unlocked the door, the same way it had been for years. That quiet belonged to me now, in a way it hadn't before. I set my keys down and rested my hand on the entry table, grounding myself in the simple truth that the walls, the floors, the memories were still mine. Nothing had been taken from me. Something had been returned. David hung his coat and watched me carefully. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. And this time, the words didn't feel like practice. Over the next weeks, I heard things secondhand. Invitations went out without Victoria's name. Birthdays were smaller. Dinners rearranged themselves naturally, without announcement or confrontation. People didn't choose sides. They chose peace. Victoria noticed. She stopped calling. One afternoon, Rebecca came by with coffee and said, "They're being careful now." "Everyone is." "They should be," I replied, not with bitterness, with clarity. That night, David and I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where years ago I had nearly signed away more than property. "I need to say this," I told him. "I helped create what she became." He didn't argue. He reached for my hand. "You tried to love without limits," he said. "That's not a crime. It's just unfinished learning." That was the lesson I carried forward. Love without boundaries teaches the wrong people the wrong things. Silence is not kindness when it allows harm to grow. And dignity does not require an audience. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, or mistaken endurance for strength, I hope this story reminds you that boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop explaining yourself. Before bed, David turned off the lights and said softly, "You took more home than a house tonight." "I know," I said, feeling the calm settle in. I took myself back. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. There you have it. The complete story rewritten with the new character names: Catherine Sterling, Victoria Sterling, David, and Rebecca Moore.